Welcome into the Power Lunch for Wednesday, October the 11th. We appreciate you joining us. And as Richie said at the end of the program, we've got sports for you this weekend. Tomorrow night, Dixon versus Independence at home, 7 o'clock kickoff, 6:30 pregame show presented by A1 Signs. Then on Friday night, Creekwood is at White House. Long drive for them. We believe that'll be a 7 o'clock kickoff as well. Both those games can be heard on WDKN and the 1FM. Saturday at 11 o'clock, the Vols take on South Carolina, and who knows what's going to happen there. That should be a lovely game. And then on Monday night, the Battle of the Backups as Jacoby Brissett faces off against Nashville's own Matt Castle on Monday Night Football. That should also be one of those that you might consider having extra nachos that night and just paying less attention to the game. It's going to be tough, folks. We'll say that. Now, today we have a very special show. I'm thrilled to have this because, as most of you know...
Well, you're thrilled to have me.
Yes, I'm thrilled. Alex Spann here with us today. I'm thrilled to have him. Now, but as most of our listenership knows, I love talking about politics, the process. Alex and I have a soft spot in our heart for voting. I was watching the show The Newsroom. I don't know if anyone here has seen that or not, but they were covering an election. And one of the hosts on the show just kept saying, we're seeing democracy in action, and it's a beautiful thing. And that's kind of how Alex and I feel about voting.
We've done it for a few years, so it's fun. And, of course, all the processes, all the elections are different. So we see different appeals to different types of voters. And what we're going to talk about today is yet another one.
Today we are looking to discuss the gubernatorial election next year for 2018, and we have our first candidate in with us today. That's Speaker of the House, Miss Beth Harwell. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be in Dixon. And I have to tell you, as a former professor of political science, you warm my heart by encouraging everyone to participate in the process.
That has been a big thing for Alex and I.
We preach that.
We talk about every opportunity we can, and certainly we anticipate a bigger turnout here locally next year because we'll have a governor's race, a county mayor race.
Open governor's seat, open senatorial seat, United States Senate's plus our county seats. So it's going to be fun. The ballot's going to be long, which can equivalent to long lines at the polls, but that's all right.
We enjoy that. Now, Speaker Harwell,
yes.
We want to give folks a little background on you. We were talking actually out in the lobby. Mm-hmm. You came to Tennessee for college and then got stuck.
Yeah.
You chose to stay like so many people do.
Right. I came to college at the age of 16 to attend David Lipscomb University in Nashville, fell in love with Tennessee, and it's been home ever since.
Now, you got your PhD at my favorite place in the world, Vanderbilt University.
Correct.
Talk us a little bit through that transition. You came for college, and then here you are all these years later.
Right.
What made you stay?
Well, I love Tennessee, and Tennessee is just home to me now, and the people are gracious, and this is a wonderful state. There's no other state in the nation I'd rather live in than Tennessee.
That's kind of how I think we both feel, too. I've visited a few.
I've been lucky to travel around the country, and it's beautiful, and they all have their niches, but there's no place like home, and Tennessee's
There's no place like home.
Well, in 1988, you decided to jump into the political field.
Right.
Our former Power Lunch host, Chris Norman, used to ask candidates what mule kicked you in the head. I think that gets to the crux of it. Why subject yourself to a life of torment? What made you decide to become a political servant?
Well, for one thing, I truly believe in state government. It is the government that's closest to the people. When we see the absolute dysfunction in Washington, D.C., I'm just so proud of the fact that in the state of Tennessee, we still are functioning. We balance our budget. We're a low tax, low debt state. But I originally got involved in the political process because my grandmother and I watched the Watergate proceedings on TV together. And I just knew that I wanted to be a part of that give and take and that good can triumph. And that was my beginning.
I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say, you know what got me into politics? The dysfunction of Watergate. But that really was an opportunity to see political proceedings.
Absolutely.
And at the time, we didn't have, C-SPAN,
right.
Fox, CNN, and MSNBC weren't covering every political proceeding.
Exactly.
That was a glimpse into politics that most people didn't get to see until then. So it's kind of revolutionary.
It really was. And, back in the old days, I have to admit, back in those old days, there were 3 channels on TV. So you watched what was on one of those 3 channels. But it was an eye-opening experience for me. And then, I really went on to teach political science at Belmont University. And during that time, Ronald Reagan was president, and he truly was one of my heroes. I loved what he brought to the political dialogue and the political arena, and thought he was a great president and greatly influenced me.
Well, he certainly had a long, endearing influence on the Republican Party, which we'll get into some of that coming up a bit later on. Now, you've served since then, since 1988. You took your seat in January of 1989.
Right.
And you've served in the House ever since. In 2011, you became the first female Speaker of the House in the state of Tennessee. What an honor. What was that like for you?
It really is an honor. The very fact that my colleagues voted to allow me to serve as Speaker means so much to me. And I really think that I've been Speaker over these last 7 years through some of our state's most productive and boldest initiatives, some of our most successful initiatives. Again, this is a wonderful state to live in, and hopefully I've been a part of that.
Well, as Speaker, actually, for most people, we don't understand necessarily what that even means. Kind of run down the difference in just serving in the House and now you're the Speaker. Right.
Well, you know, if you haven't, I say to your audience, if you hadn't had an opportunity to come down and see the General Assembly in action, I really encourage people to do that. Actually, what the Speaker does is similar to being a teacher in the classroom. You know, could you talk anytime you wanted to in the classroom? No. What you have to do? Raise your hand. And the same is true on the House floor. No one can speak on the House floor unless the Speaker of the House turns and lets them speak. I acknowledge them. And so I turn their microphones on when they want to talk on the House floor. Now, if I turn their microphones on, I can also turn their microphones off. You got it. So what in essence, what I do is make sure that there's proper decorum on the House floor at all times. I don't allow members to say ugly things to each other. I don't allow them to get off the subject at hand. If they do, I gavel them down and call point of order. So unlike some of the nastiness that you see in Washington, D.C., that's not the Tennessee way. We function in a very civil manner on the House floor on a daily basis.
It's interesting that you put it that way because Senator Roberts had us out to the Capitol, and we did the show from the Senate chambers, which was phenomenal. But he talked about the fact that Republican and Democrat at the state level in Tennessee don't really make that much of a difference from an order standpoint. You mentioned Washington. In Washington, you're on the red side or the blue side. There's a big gap up the middle, and you just don't cross over. But here in Tennessee, we have a longstanding tradition of working across party lines. And that really does make us unique, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And, you know, when I became Speaker, it was the first time that the Republicans had taken the majority of the state House. And so one of the things that I said to my Republican caucus, my Republican Party is, you know, our job now is not to perhaps treat the Democrats like we have been treated, but rather to treat them how we would have liked to have been treated when we were in the minority. So I have gone out of my way to treat the Democrats with respect because I think they offer ideas and bring things to the table. At the end of the day, the Republicans are in charge of both the House, the Senate, and the governorship, but we are respectful of other people's points of views. And I think that is healthy, and I think it's positive.
Political discourse at its finest. Now, one of the things that, as I've talked with folks around the area coming into this interview, they're curious, you know, at the state level, we might not know our representative or our speaker for that level. Run us through some of the principles that guide you as a politician.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, basically, when I became Speaker, I said, you know, I want my members to put every piece of legislation through a litmus test before they vote yes or no. And that litmus test really consists of 3 questions. And the 3 questions are this. Number 1, does it increase the size of government? We believe in limited government in the state of Tennessee. We don't want to overregulate. We just want to balance our budget, keep our taxes low, and quite frankly, the statistics I'm most proud of, be the lowest debt state in the nation. So we've accomplished that. The second question is, does it make it easier to own and operate a business in the state of Tennessee? We want to be a business-friendly state, and I think you see that here in Dixon, as we have really just grown here in Middle Tennessee, because people know here is a great place to come and live and work and even retire now, because we did away with the inheritance tax. Sure. And then third and finally, does it continue to push us forward in education reform? One of the most important things we do in government is provide public education so that we are better preparing the workforce for the next generation. And, you know, those 3 questions have guided me as the Speaker of the House, and they will guide me in the governor's office.
Well, that's Alex, I think we can both agree with the Speaker when we're talking about growth. You and I, in our lifetime, we were just talking about this with Mayor Weiss the other day. He served for 30 years, almost, I think he just celebrated his 30th.
He's been a part of city government for 30. Right. He's been the mayor since 1993.
So you all, he's seen over Dixon, you've seen at the state level, but we were talking about town used to end at Thunder Alley.
Right. If that. And it was a 2-lane road from Thunder Alley to the interstate. And between Thunder Alley, which was Walmart at that time, to the interstate was Nothing. A
Woods.
couple of residential homes, and that was it. And now it's a 4-lane 5 if you count the turning lane. Umpteen red lights between here and there, and it takes longer to get from Charlotte, where I live, to the interstate in Dixon than it does to get from Dixon to Nashville.
Well, and that's kind of when we hear you talk about small business. I promise you, it resonates here locally. Now, one of the things that you mentioned was small government, and my next question was going to be, what makes you a conservative? But when you say that, that's the preemptive. That is the tenet.
That
of
is the core
conservatism.
principle of conservatism, is that we keep government limited, we keep our taxes low. We're the third lowest tax state in the nation. As I said, we're the lowest debt state in the nation, and those things matter. The very fact that this state does not have an income tax is a wonderful thing. The very fact, we take it for granted as Tennesseans, but we shouldn't. We balance our budget every year. And you compare that to other states, it's remarkable what we've been able to do. I will go next week with Governor Haslam to New York City to the bond hearings. And last year we walked away with a AAA bond rating. We're praying that we're going to do that again, because we enjoy the status of one of 11 states in the nation that has a AAA bond rating. Those things matter. When you have your fiscal house in order, then you can do other great things. If your fiscal house is out of order, you really can't do much of anything else.
And we've seen it with regards to industry locally, but across the state as well. The Amazon deal. We all know there was a lot to that, but not having an income tax was a large part of that. Doll Tile that came here to Dixon, the tax rate in this area played a big role.
Continues to expand.
Right.
We've got that. Speaker, my question is, how proud from a leadership standpoint does it make you to be the lowest debt state in the country, in the nation, but to see the success that Tennessee's had?
It just makes me so proud. I mean, our state has momentum going its way. Not only do we have folks that are friendly and nice, Tennessee's just a good place to live. It's a good feeling here. But we're doing things right in state government. We understand limited government is best. We understand low taxes are best. And the things pay off. When you go out and recruit industry to your state, that's the type of things you talk about, and people respect that.
You see the unemployment rate continue to drop, and
Yes.
that's 3% here in Dixon County, something like
It's
that.
tiny.
So, it's phenomenal.
If you want a job, it's out there. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll continue with Speaker Harwell right after this Bloomberg report brought to you by TriStar Bank. Welcome back on the Power Lunch. 11:45 the time. It continues to get cooler outside.
Don't knock it.
Man, that global warming is kicking our butt today. It's 64 out there, though. It was 71 when I came in and did my first weather update at 6:15 this morning. 64 outside right now, and supposedly we're going to warm back up towards 69 at some point this afternoon. But right now, very cool out there. 74 tomorrow, 80 by Friday, and mid-80s for your weekend with a chance of storms on Sunday. So get out and enjoy that gorgeous Tennessee weather today. We're talking about the gorgeous state of Tennessee with gubernatorial hopeful Speaker Beth Harwell. And before the break, we were kind of talking about the ins and outs of you and your rise in politics. And I was looking over my notes last night, and you helped with the McCain campaign in 2006. Is that right?
I did.
Now, for me, and maybe this is just my age.
2008,
right. Maybe this is just my age, but for me, that was kind of a shift in the way the political game worked. Prior to that, I was fairly involved in, but prior to that, it just seemed like politics were different. Did you feel, because you had been in the game a while at the time, did you feel like things were different going into that election?
Well, in a way, yes. I mean, I've been state party chairman of the Republican Party for 4 years during the George W. Bush administration, and it's one of the things that's happened is in politics is communication has become easier in a way. It used to be that you needed to have a ton of money because you had to buy a lot of TV commercials. Even me, as old as I am, I don't watch TV commercials. I fast forward through them, And so, and my kids for sure streamline everything. So, the dynamics have changed considerably. And so things like Facebook and Twitter and all that has become just so much more important in today's political arena than it ever was before. And some of that's positive. But also I think it's in some ways cheapened communication because I think things can be said over the internet that are not verified and can sometimes get ugly. And that's a little disheartening.
Well, that was kind of how I saw things change. Is it seemed like campaigns got nastier.
Yeah.
You go 08, 2012, certainly 2016, which I'm sure we'll talk about some of that later on. But it seemed like things got nastier, and not from the news media necessarily. Maybe this last time, but yeah, social media really affected things, and we saw President Obama ride a wave during that election cycle.
For sure.
And there just wasn't a way to combat that. He had a grasp over social media that we didn't necessarily have. But at the same time that was going on, we started to see a shift in Tennessee in politics from a party standpoint. 2004, 2008, and then of course in 2010, we saw this state change completely red.
Absolutely.
In fact, right now, I don't know if there's a state with a higher disparity.
Yes.
I think in the Senate, 83%, something like that. What did you notice over that time that started to tilt Tennessee more and more red?
Right, and again, I was state party chairman when we took the majority in the state Senate for the first time in our history, and over 140 years. And what I really saw is that folks, Tennesseans are good people, and they're conservative people, and they want traditional values to be upheld. And certainly, I think our message as the Republican Party is that we are the party of traditional values and core common sense when it comes to government. And I saw that pay off for our party. And now we have a tremendous responsibility to govern appropriately. And so I think we've done that. As Lieutenant Governor Ramsey used to say, it matters who governs. I think we have proven that here in the state of Tennessee. Our state is well managed under Republican leadership.
I'm curious, though, because I have talked with our all Republican representation out of Dixon, Representative Harwell, Representative Littleton, Representative Curcio, and Senator Roberts. And one of the things that we've discussed is the advantages and disadvantages of having an all-red government, because everybody would think, okay, here's a law or here's a bill, stamp, stamp, stamp.
Right.
It's gone through the two houses and onto the governor's desk, and we're done. That's not the case. What are some of the difficulties, if you will, that might surprise folks about working in that environment?
Well, I will tell you that even though we're the majority party, there is some differences. I mean, this is I think, a lovely, diverse state. So what's important to people in Mountain City and Bristol might not be important to the folks from Memphis, and vice versa. So at the end of the day, my job as speaker is to get everybody going on the same page and moving an entire state forward. So there will always be little disagreements. But again, what I find so refreshing about state government as opposed to what we see in Washington, D.C., at the end of the day, we get things done. And we're not dysfunctional. And sometimes you've got to set aside things and come to the table and work out an agreement. And I think that's a good sign for our state and for our party.
You mentioned...
No, go ahead.
You mentioned the diversity amongst the party. It seems like we function in such a world of red and blue. If you're red, you're a Republican. If you're blue, you're a Democrat. But the reality is the Republican Party has actually become more diverse, I would say, over the last decade than a lot of people realize. We had the Tea Party movement, right, which you survived. Congratulations. And then we have what are more traditional, moderate Republicans, which I think, I don't know, but I feel as though you may fall in that category. How have we become such a diverse party over that time? Because there are so many different views.
Little parties under one umbrella.
Right. Well, I think it's only natural when your party moves to not being just the majority party, but being the super majority party, that you're going to have some differences within the party. But at the end of the day, I think our Republican Party stands for certain things, fiscal conservatism, pro-life. I mean, there's certain things we just stand for. We may disagree on a few issues. But again, I go back to one of my heroes being Ronald Reagan, because at the end of the day, you need to find common ground, and you need to be able to smile and work well with other people. And if we ever lose that, we'll be in trouble. Well,
it's certainly an interesting party. I would say that I've talked to so many people, with even voters. I feel like there's such a diverse group, and maybe it's just because we watch TV on a nightly basis.
This is our life, Freeman.
Yeah, CNN, MSNBC. But it just, when you watch those, it feels like, okay, we've got all the blue people wear the exact same shirt. They all think the exact same thing. And I do feel like the Republican Party is enriched because there are varied views. Yeah, exactly. And certainly in a state like Tennessee. You mentioned Memphis, there's Nashville, and then there's little old Dixon somewhere out in between.
Great place.
You do go, though, from large cities to rural folks. Does that especially as you run for the governor. Does that make it? Do you have to work on kind of appealing to both of those groups?
Well, it's easy to do because I think there's some common ground that all of us as Tennesseans share. And certainly the rural areas have their own unique needs, but they also, to be honest with you, are great places to live. And it's surprising when I go in the rural areas how many people say, I wouldn't live anywhere else. This is where I want to raise my family. This is the values that I want to have. And I don't want to ever get in the traffic that exists in Nashville or Memphis. So this is where I want to live. And it's a good thing. And as long as we are providing an educated workforce and we're continuing to recruit industry into our areas, I think we're going to do great as a state.
Well, we're going to go ahead and take our next break for news. When we come back, we're going to discuss Governor Haslam. One of his big pushes, as you mentioned earlier, has been education. We're going to talk about education in Tennessee, as well as continued job growth in a state that, as Alex mentioned, we're at 3%.
Something like that. And
Somewhere around
the
there.
county especially.
3% as a county, I think 4.5% for the entire state. So
Never been lower. That's amazing.
how do you continue to grow jobs from there? Well, we'll talk about that coming up later on in the Power Lunch here on 101.5 The One and WDKN. Welcome back on the Power Lunch here for Wednesday, October the 11th, just shy of noon in downtown Dixon. And we hope you're doing well out there. We're talking with Speaker of the House, Beth Harwell, about her candidacy for governor. That's a lot to say.
Yeah.
And you have to say it a lot more than I do. Before the break, we teased the fact that we were going to talk about education. And I think Tennessee's made a lot of strides under Governor Haslam. I know when he came into office, he kind of just gave this mandate to the House, the Senate, and said, we're going to focus on education. Run us through some of the things that the state government has done to try and help bring up those numbers for Tennessee.
And I'm so glad that he did because, my background is in academics, and so I'm a firm believer in it. I'll say a couple things. One, we put some high standards in place. When President Obama was president, he tried to kind of jam Common Core down our throats. And we did what Tennesseans always do. We rolled up our sleeves and we sat down and brought Tennessee educators and Tennessee business leaders in a room, and we wrote our own Tennessee standards, Tennessee Ready. And I think they're some of the highest standards in the nation. And it's, I will have to tell you, we put accountability in place. We put high standards in place. We put accountability in place, and it's paying off. We're really turning a corner. I just read in the newspaper this morning that we've increased our ACT scores, net scores for children coming out of high school. That's a great thing. So we're doing some right things. Is everything perfect? No. We still have a long way to go. We still have a problem with lack of reading ability in our schools. And so I would love to, as governor, work on that. One of the things I think is important is having reading coaches, catching these children early on, not waiting till they're in high school, but rather doing it in second, third grade is going to be critical going forward. And of course, we've put in place the Drive to 55, hoping that more and more of our young people, and I commend the General Assembly because we amended the governor's original proposal and made sure that technological schools were included. So if you want to go to TCAT, that's included, and 2 years of that is free. And to tell you the truth, that's the wave of the future. I mean, what I hear consistently in employers across the state is they need skilled workforce. And that's where our technology schools can help us so very much.
But that kind of goes back to where education in the past got, especially in the high school arena, got away from the vocational. When Freeman, when we talked about this, Freeman, when we were in school, it was the push for a 4-year degree, and that's still a great thing. But at that point, our high schools started to get away from the vocational area, which now we're seeing that come full swing again, and that be the thing. Where do we look at? Well, let me back up. In Dixon County, a couple of weeks ago, the Chamber of Commerce, along with the Industrial Park, did a summit for our high schoolers, where all the industries came to one of the high schools and displayed, this is what we do in your own county, and this is what we need as far as workers. How do we go back and make sure that our high schools are prepared for that? Because, like you mentioned, it is the wave of the future.
Right. And I think that's a model. I mean, what you did here in Dixon is the wave of the future. We need to get the business community more engaged and involved with our education. In the past, there's been a disconnect. It's like education was over here and business was over here. We've got to mesh them. And we need the input of the business community to say, okay, here's what we're going to need. I mean, we need so many welders. We need so many ITs. We need so many commercial driver license recipients. And, and I'll be honest with you, I think college college is a great thing, but I don't think it's right for every young person. And I think that's a myth to perpetuate that everyone needs to go to college. They don't. You can make a tremendous living. Be honest with you, I have a doctorate degree in Vanderbilt. I don't make as much as the people that come and the plumber that works at my house. But you know what? That's good. That's a good thing, because someone that comes out with those type of skills can even eventually one day own their own business. And that's America. That's what's made this country great.
It's interesting we're sitting here talking about that pendulum swinging from four-year degree back. President Trump focused in his campaign on the tax rate and things like that, deals being one of the things that has kind of forced industry out of the U.S. One of the things that Apple has talked about is the lack of people available to do the things that they need to build my iPhone that I'm holding in my hand. And I heard them talk one day about the idea that all the people in the U.S. that could do a certain job for an iPhone fit into a conference room. Tennessee's done a nice job with this program, and I want to talk some more about it, because the lottery funds, you guys did a great job. As I understand it, bankrolled the first year.
Absolutely, yes.
And we're kind of living off the dividends of that now. But to put an emphasis on 2-year degrees and nursing degrees and that sort of thing really does steer the state in a direction that, as we were just talking about, prepares you for the future. But it's also a sales pitch. When you want to go out and get Apple and say, hey, we'd really like you to leave China and come.
Yeah.
Well, they need people that can do that job. And I'm sure when you pitch a business, you're talking about education levels and that sort of thing, just as much as you are taxes.
Absolutely. And one of the things I really agree with President Trump is the call for more apprenticeships. We need to help young people get into the workforce to figure out what they want to do. When I was 15, 16 years old, do you really know what you want to do? But it's that time is kind of a critical time. So we need to expose them for what's available out there. And, the job market has changed considerably from when I was going to college. And you're absolutely right. You've got to be skilled in high tech. That is the future. Even if you go into a manufacturing plant, you can actually go into a manufacturing plant, and all those folks are doing is working with a computer, because they don't really even touch the product anymore. All of that has been robotics, and it's a changed world.
And our TCAT, our local TCAT here, has a mechatronics program, which is a state of the art.
Absolutely.
And again, it goes back to factory jobs aren't, quote, factory jobs like they used to be anymore.
That is very
it's
true.
so robotic, and people have to be able to work on those. Robots do the work, but if they break, they've got to be fixed as well.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you both mentioned that. In 2006, I believe, I worked at NEMAC for a very short time. That was not the job for me, but I worked there. My dad's worked there for years. They recently had their 30th anniversary, and I got to take a plant tour for the first time in almost a decade. And I went in. I didn't recognize the plant because the machines are the same,
Yes.
but what's running them is not. And they have people that are operating computers. I might could have worked there if I'd known I was just going to get to do some of that, but the heat got to me. But it is interesting to see how that works. Now, going back to high school level, we talk about ACTs and those sorts of scores, but it's really about secondary readiness, is it not? How do we go from, we're testing well, to we're ready for that next step? Because I think Alex and I can probably both agree, when it came to secondary education, 2004 for me, 2006 for you, I don't know that we felt ready for the next step.
And and there's so much graduate. It's all about numbers. Nowadays, and data, push data. We have a almost 96% graduation rate here in the county, which is superb.
Yeah, right.
Hundreds the goal, but it goes back to what Freeman said. How do we prepare and make sure our students that are coming out of the secondary schools are ready? Things like the industrial fair in the building at the schools make a difference, because it shows kids what's out there. But talking to a college recruiter for 5 minutes doesn't say that you're ready to go to Belmont, or you're ready for Vanderbilt or Austin Peay.
Well, again, and we've kind of lied to ourselves for quite a while in education. We thought we were educating the next workforce. In fact, we weren't. And, the national test showed that. But we are one of the fastest improving states in the nation, because we've raised our standards. Our teachers are doing outstanding jobs. Our schools are to be commended. They're living up to it. And I appreciate absolutely everyone in education. And we need to even recruit better prepared teachers in our classrooms, because you're right, the math and the sciences is just something we need to emphasize more in our high schools.
Now, I mentioned the lottery scholarship. We had the landmark decision by our state to provide free 2-year community college, technical schools. That program has expanded so much. It went from when I first got it in 2004, it was a $3,000 a year scholarship. And now we're talking, your first 2 years are free. Well, now 2 years of community college. Tennessee Reconnect, bringing old bums like myself back to education. Where do you foresee, should you win the governorship, where do you foresee an expansion in that program? Because we know the funds are going to be there. What's next for that?
Well, I think the most important thing for the next governor to do is to evaluate these programs not based on intention but on results. So are these students that are going back into school, either a working adult going back in for an additional training or a young person going into community college for the first time, are they in fact graduating? And are they graduating in a degree that they can find work in that area? And are we raising our medium salary income in the state of Tennessee because of this program? So we've got a good program in place. Young people are participating in it. I just think now we need to sit back and evaluate it. Sometimes we have a tendency in government to just say, well, they have the best of intentions. That's not good enough. We need to see results. And that's going to be over the next 2 to 3 years. We'll see whether we're making results or not. I think we will. I certainly hope we do.
Well, with that, we're going to take our next break. When we come back, we're going to talk about growth in the state. We've discussed it. Employment numbers are way up, unemployment way down. It didn't give you much room for growth. Yeah. We'll talk about how Tennessee can grow in the next segment here on the Power Lunch. Plus, we've got your questions that some of you submitted to us via email and online. We'll talk about those when we return as well here on the Power Lunch on 101.5 The One and WDKN. Welcome back on the Power Lunch here. We're talking with Speaker of the House, Beth Harwell, about her candidacy for the governorship, which I still say, you got to be crazy. But
or love Tennessee, that sounds
Or
better.
love Tennessee. That's what it is. It's a love for Tennessee. Well, we were talking before the break. In your time in Tennessee, the last nearly 30 years now, incredible growth
Absolutely.
in Tennessee. We've seen just so much growth here. But we've also talked about the difficulty that you would face as governor, which is that we've seen such growth. Where does Tennessee go from here? We're a very prosperous state at this point. How do you continue that and expound upon it?
Well, number one, we've got to make sure that we keep our fiscal house in order. As I've said, we need to keep our taxes low. There's a reason why industry wants to come to Tennessee. And I think our big challenge is to provide a workforce that is well educated. And because when you go out and you talk to people about coming to Tennessee, that's their number one concern. Will you provide us the workforce that we need? Will you have a well-trained workforce? And we're working on that right now, and we're making great strides.
Well, that certainly... I just don't know, Alex, if in my mind I can... How do we get bigger? Especially in Nashville. In fact, if we could export some Nashville out to the rest of the state, that'd be
Well, I
fine.
think you're experiencing that in Dixon.
We are.
You really are growing here, and it's
that's
kind of
part
spreading
of it.
out.
It's not necessarily growing because sometimes you flat out run out of room. Like our industrial park is full, but it's also sustaining that momentum.
Yeah.
How do we continue as plants will come and go? That's the nature of the game. But how do we make sure that those factories, when they're empty, are refilled, or another company buys them out? And Dixon, especially, we've been the, what'd you say?
I said we're looking at you, Daltile.
Yes, that's right, and great example, absolutely. But how do we, as Dixon's been dubbed by some like the last frontier from Nashville, especially. Everything's gone north, east, south, and then we're out here. We have 840, which is a great connector for us. But we've seen a lot of progress. Our downtown, the revitalization grants, and that's beautiful. Great. But our industrial park as well. How do we sustain that momentum?
Well, I think President Trump said it best. We need to make America great again. We need to have America known as this is the country where you have low business taxes and people want to start businesses here. I'm so proud in the state of Tennessee. When I became speaker, I said we're going to do away with the inheritance tax because it's double taxing people, and it's surprising how many people will come and live in the state, and when they get close to retirement, they say we're leaving and going to Florida because they don't want to pay the inheritance tax or the gift tax. We've eliminated both of those, and actually our revenue is going up. So when you have very tax-friendly policy, your state can flourish, and we will continue to flourish.
Now, from that, I want to pivot and just ask you, what do you see as the biggest issue facing Tennessee and Tennesseans over the next 4 years?
Well, as I've traveled the state, without a doubt, the issue that keeps popping up almost every area is the abuse of opioids. I mean, we do have a crisis not only in our state but as a nation as a whole, that people are misusing drugs, and we all have a little blame on our shoulders. I mean, people want quick fixes for pain. There is no quick fix. We've got to reevaluate that, and I think doctors are overprescribing, and I think the pharmaceutical industry to some degree has misled us on how addictive these drugs are. So that's a real challenge. I mean, not only are we ruining human potential, consistently employers tell me we just need people that can pass the drug test, because it's a serious problem. But I will also say it's a fiscal crisis for our state. When a child is born addicted to opioids, you cannot imagine how expensive that is. It's $60,000 to $80,000 to get that child just through the hospital care, and then there's lifetime problems for that child. So it's a real crisis for our state, and it's one we just have to get out ahead of.
What type of advantage does Tennessee have, Speaker, being a healthcare mecca in the nation, to be able to battle that front?
Well, we're doing research on what exactly is an alternative drug that we can help these folks with. I do think that one of the solutions we need to look at going forward is more drug courts, as opposed to, if somebody gets picked up for abuse or misuse of opioids, they can usually get a sentence of 3 years in the Department of Corrections. Well, really, that's a waste of human potential, because we're not going to reform them in the Department of Corrections system. Plus, it's very expensive. It's about $100,000 for a prison bed, right? And that's a very high expense. On the other hand, if we have more drug courts where people could be sentenced to rehabilitation, those beds only cost us about $40,000, so it fiscally makes sense for our state. But we have an opportunity to turn people's lives around. But I will tell you, these opioids are extremely addictive. And we really need to offer these folks hope.
Luckily, Freeman, we have a phenomenal drug court system in this 23rd Judicial District, which is a model for a lot of
It is. It was one of our pilots, and it's been very successful.
I'm curious, though, from a legislative standpoint, you mentioned the overprescribing of drugs. I tell this story from time to time. I had a shoulder injury. I was 16 years old. They wrote me a 25-pill prescription for Percocet. For a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Why is that happening?
Yes.
So is there something legislatively that you foresee that could be done with regards to that? I mean, how do we go about legislating without maybe necessarily what you would see as overreach? Because you never want to tell a doctor, hey, don't do this if it's necessary.
Right. And we're not doctors, and so it would be wrong for us to try to do that. But I will tell you that we have put limitations in place for the number of opioids people can get in emergency rooms. We have really cracked down on pain clinics, saying that you can't get both the prescription and the fill there. You have to go to, so there's a second checking point. We have set up a statewide database that's available to doctors. Pharmacists are supposed to check it, as well as law enforcement. So we're not doctor shopping, which is a problem. So we've done some corrective actions, but the bottom line is people just need to be educated on how addictive these products can be.
And while we're on healthcare, I do have to ask you, it looks like the president may sign an executive order in the next few days, which would change some things, we think, on the small business front as far as healthcare. But Tennessee is a state where, there are some counties out east that may only have one option going into 2018 for health insurance. We've seen premium hikes. We've seen skyrocketing costs on the healthcare side. Is there anything that can be done on a state level to try and alleviate some of this?
Well, I firmly believe that Obamacare has been a failure. I mean, I think it's drive the cost of healthcare up. It hasn't brought it down. And I really think that if the federal government would return domestic issues back to the state governments, where they can be more efficiently and effectively run, state governments are the laboratory for change. I mean, we really are. We could put some things in place that I think could curtail cost and actually provide better services for the public. It may be just as simple things as health savings accounts. My husband owns his own business, and he put in place health savings accounts. And one day he came home and he said, Beth, I was walking down the hallway and I overheard a conversation of a young man that works for me on the phone saying, how much do you charge for delivering a baby? He said, Beth, we've had 3 children. We never asked that question. I mean, part of the problem we have in healthcare is no one's asking the question is, how much does this cost? A perfect example would be LASIK surgery, eye surgery. When that first came in existence, it was pretty high. And then you saw a lot of advertising and competition, and the price went down because insurance wasn't just automatically covering it. So to bring in the free market to our healthcare system, I think is something that's desperately needed.
Well, it's interesting to me. You mentioned states are the testing ground. Tennessee tested a form, if you will, of Obamacare with 10-care. And we know how that went.
Yes.
Without delving too far into it, we know that didn't work well. Why do you think the federal government saw something like that and said, no, we should give this a shot too? We should try it on a larger scale.
I have to be honest with you, I've never understood how they make decisions in Washington, D.C. That's a little above me. I don't know.
I understand. Well, before we take our last break, we're going to get to some listener questions next, but I do want to ask you this. In 2016, 61% of Tennesseans voted for President Trump, and I saw it just the other day, an article saying that May Beavers is the Trump candidate. That's been a big term popped out there in this election. Trump candidates, Sanders candidates, the more extreme candidates. When you hear people say that's the Trump candidate, how would you juxtapose yourself to Senator Beavers and say, no, I'm the Republican candidate, I'm a true conservative?
Well, I think I have a voting record that illustrates that I'm a conservative. I was long before it was cool, long before it was okay to be a Republican. I've been in the trenches working, and I did vote for President Trump and support him. He's our president, and I want to see him successful, because when he's successful, our nation is, and so I pray for him. I hope he is. I think that most Republicans share that view.
Well, with that, we will take our last break. When we come back, we've got some listener questions for the Speaker of the House when we return here on the Power Lunch on 101.5 The One and WDKN. Welcome back on the Power Lunch here on 101.5 The One and WDKN. We're talking with Speaker of the House Beth Harwell about her candidacy for governor, and we've got this is the tough part.
Okay.
Because when I ask questions, they're what we would call refined, thought through.
There you go.
We submitted for some email questions, and we got a handful, and we got a couple on Facebook as well. The first question, and I think this is one that everyone asks, especially after what we saw happen in Vegas, but they're curious what your stance on the Second Amendment is, especially with regards to things like these bump stocks and that sort of thing. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I obviously am a supporter of the Second Amendment. I am a gun-carrying permit holder. I think that's the right of every Tennessean, every American. I will say that I think the bump stocks were something that even the National Rifle Association is saying, are these necessary, or is this something really valuable to our culture and society? So I will wait and see what the NRA does at the federal level on that issue, but I am supportive of Second Amendment rights.
Next question, and actually both of these next two I think are going to be hot button issues in the coming years. What is your stance first on cannabis oil and other forms of medical marijuana?
Well, I've told publicly that I will keep an open mind regarding medical marijuana. I have studied it enough to realize that it does have some beneficial use for some illnesses, especially those people that are, terminally ill. And to be honest with you, it's not near as addictive as some of the opioid prescriptions that we're giving now. And if God gives you a plant, I think that's almost a little bit safer than synthetic drugs that are created. So I'm keeping an open mind. We have a task force looking into it right now.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just saw Trey Gowdy the other day at the national level asking, why is this a Schedule I drug, but something like cocaine is Schedule II?
Right.
That's one of those baffling mysteries. And then the next question that they asked was a follow-up to that, which was, would you ever consider recreational marijuana in the state of Tennessee?
No,
I know where this person's going.
I have to tell you, I have a daughter that graduated from the University of Colorado in Boulder. If you've ever been to Boulder, you're not really that high on recreational use, because it's easy to get abusive of something like that. So, I'm not saying that marijuana is safe. I'm saying that I think it has some medical reasons that some folks would be able to use it. We do know that it helps, for example, with children in seizure. We do know with cancer, it's very beneficial for people that are going through that treatment. So I'm open to that.
And as you mentioned, Representative Faison was part of the move that's led to a task force to look into this at the state level. This next one, this person, their name was Landon, and he took a class that you taught at Belmont.
Okay, I remember Landon. You may not remember me, but I remember him, yes.
He says he recalls you supporting Mayor Boner years ago, and how your stance, how your views have changed since then.
Well, I think I was involved in that campaign a little bit. You have to understand, growing up in Davidson County, it's going to be a Democrat in the mayor's office, as it is now, and will be. But we're making strides, and I think our Republican Party is growing in every branch, and certainly in Davidson County. And I'm supportive. If we can find a Republican candidate, that's great. Be supportive.
This next one pointed to some media reports last year that you may have had an alternative plan to the Improve Act. But eventually supported it instead. As a Republican, how do you rectify with conservatism a multifold tax hike? And then also, do you plan for those hikes to stay should you become governor?
Well, I will say this. I didn't initially support the governor's proposal because I thought we could find a dedicated new source of revenue for our roads. No one disagrees that we need to put money into our infrastructure. No one does. I mean, we needed roads, we needed broadband, we needed infrastructure in our state. The President of the United States, President Trump, called for more money going to infrastructure. He's not been successful because they can't get anything done at the federal level. But here in Tennessee, I said, what? Let's not raise taxes. Let's not lower taxes. Let's take the money that comes in through the sales tax on the sale of cars, both new and used, and let's dedicate that to our roads. I think it made sense to transfer that money from our general fund over. I couldn't get the support necessary because a lot of my members felt like, no, people that drive into this state, a fourth of the gasoline that's sold in this state is paid for by out-of-state drivers. A half of the diesel tax that is paid in this state is paid for by out-of-state truckers. Truckers are the ones that are tearing up our roads, right?
Sure.
And we knew we needed more money in our infrastructure. So at the bottom of the day, I'm not going to be like Congress. We're going to get something done. We have 295 road projects that are now under construction, starting, and I think that's a good thing for our state. It is part of economic development. It is a user's fee. If you use the roads, you pay for the roads. And I will tell you that we are the 22nd lowest gas tax state in the nation. You will be hard pressed to go to any state where you will pay less for gas. If you go to Georgia, you're going to pay 4 cents more. The only state you could probably pay a little bit less is in Kentucky, about a penny less there in Kentucky, but they have $36 billion worth of deficit in that state. So I wouldn't trade places with them at all. The bottom line is there's a very limited role for government, but part of that limited role is infrastructure. And I'm glad we're going to provide good infrastructure in our state.
A personal follow-up on that is we know we're getting more fuel efficient with cars. That was part of the reasoning behind a hike, and we're also moving towards electric. Do you foresee a time where we do have to go away completely from a gas tax to fund roads?
Yes. I do.
I agree.
I mean, it's coming, and again, my children's generation thinks nothing about Ubering and lifting everywhere they go.
That's fair.
And the only reason I think my son has a truck is because he goes hunting on the weekends. I mean, other than that, they just, when they're in town, they Uber where they want to go, and I think that's the way of the future.
We got one final listener question here, and then we'll give you a chance to pitch yourself to us. This one, very simply, how does your campaign appeal to voters specifically when you're talking about rural area voters where turnout tends to be an issue?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say our rural areas are really our backbone here in Tennessee. They are beautiful, and Dixon is a prime example of that. It's growing, it's thriving. I don't think you would ever want to be like Memphis or Nashville. You want your unique characteristics that are here. You choose to live here because you love it. And our job in state government is just to make sure that rural communities get every opportunity they would like to have, and we certainly are dedicated to doing that.
Well, Speaker Harwell, we appreciate you taking some time with us today. I'll give you just a couple of minutes here. Just tell us why. I've voted Republican in every race I've ever voted in. Why should I vote for you in the primary next year?
Well, I think I bring to this race a kind of unique situation in that I have a firm grasp of state government. I've been in it for a while. Governors can't govern on their own. They have to have everything go through the state legislature, and I think I have a unique ability to work with the legislative body, as I've proven as their speaker over the last 7 years. And I think I bring that to the table. I think some of our, as I said, our boldest, most successful initiatives have come since I've been speaker. And certainly we are a low tax, low debt state, a conservative state, and I think I've been a part of that movement.
Speaker Harwell, we appreciate it very much.
You.
Best of luck in the campaign, and we look forward to talking to you later.
Very good. Enjoyed being with you.
Alex, thank you for taking some time out of your day to be with me.
Absolutely.
And
always a pleasure.
We enjoyed every second of it. After this, we've got the John and Heidi Show next on 101.5 The One and WDKN.